England was a perfect place for me because I just love junk food. And in England, it's the only place on the planet where you could get, in the same store, you could get pizza, you could get fried chicken, you could get Indian food, you could get Middle Eastern food all at the same time. Sometimes all the same thing. So, for example, you have the pizza, hamburgers, fried chicken, and there are Indian influences such as the various curries, and curries are really good in England. And there's this thing called a doner kebab. You will definitely learn to know what it is. Some might love it, I love it. Some might hate it, but I feel it may be, doesn't do the body the good. In the States, I think we call it a gyro or a hero. It has a lot of names, but it's a block of, if you can imagine, lamb spam. And it's on a rotisserie, and it just spins around, and there's a heat source, and it kind of chars the side, and the person just shaves it off for you and put it in this usually pretty big piece of bread called naan bread, and they put all sorts of toppings on top, and wow, it just, the caloric content of that is probably minimum 2 Big Macs, easy. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. Another food I really like is called a Sunday roast. I think it's their common proper meal where you have the baked or charred turkey or chicken, and then you have the steamed vegetables, obviously. And really, and two things is really special and good in England. One is the Yorkshire pudding, and it's kind of a pastry deal. You pour gravy in it. And another one is their kind of roasted potatoes. I don't know how they do it, but they peel it and they put it in the oven and roast it. The outside is really crispy and flavorful, and the inside is very soft. And drink-wise, a specialty in England is called slur. Schlur, more if you want to be fancy about it. Really, it's just kind of like sparkling fruit juice. And most of the times, people will reserve that for the holiday, Christmas, New Year. Chinese food in England tastes more Chinese than Chinese food in China, because the early immigrants from Canton province or Hong Kong moved to England a long while ago, and they made the food the same for the past 30, 40, 50 years. Kept it authentic. Whereas China, as a country itself, the flavor has evolved. So you would go to a restaurant, they still have the classic red chopsticks or green chopsticks and the very traditional decor. Sometimes even more Chinese than China. The first day in England, it felt really surreal. England was very colorful compared to Vegas or in China. The bricks were red, the color of the buildings is just a very loud, fast place. Crime and safety is interesting. I lived in Vegas, and when I first moved there, I lived in a pretty, I would say, middle to lower class area, but I still felt relatively safe. Really, England, I feel it's much safer than the States, really. The hood here is, I would say, a much more dangerous than the hood in England. I didn't realize that could be such of a accent different, because in the movies you hear Harry Potter and how they talk, where it's more refined when they say water, but really up in Manchester in the north, they do not speak like that. It's just for about the first, I would say, 3 to 6 months, I could not understand a lot of members on the phone. I know we're speaking the same language, but it just wasn't happening. In England, really, I think there's just 2 modes of climate or weather. There is wet, or there is cold and wet. So really, a person learned to appreciate the sun, and the British definitely appreciate the sun when it shows its face that 1 week or 2 weeks or a few weeks out of it. It's not that bad, but it's definitely less frequent here than the States. When the sun comes out for that 1 week or 2 weeks in the summer, just full blast, people are just everywhere in the parks, laying down, trying to catch the sun, just basking in its glory. England is a very interesting place culturally because it's moving in a very secular direction and has been in the past 10, 20 years. yet again, there are a lot of culture that are still instilled in the people. For example, to English always, or the British always want to be proper as we say it. And you can see that in the small snippets of life. For example, the English are very good with their knives and the forks. I mean, here in the States, we usually kind of just use the fork just to eat. Maybe if we're eating a steak, we'll use a knife. But in England, it's always two hands, and they just go at it. It's left and right, left and right. England, from what I gather, has one of the hardest driving exams in the world. I remember in the States, the night before my practical test, my mom was like, son, you should learn how to parallel park. I said, Mom, I got this. I can imagine it in my head. Just go back it up, you turn right and turn left, and just real quick, just park in that spot. And the next day I was the practical, and after 2 tries, the examiner was just stop it. There's people behind you, and I still passed the exam in the States. In England, that will not happen. That will not happen. If you touch the curb one time, just the point system is much more difficult. The written test is a 2-part. There's a visual part you have to click to make sure your reaction is right. So learn how to parallel park in the States if you can, or wherever you're from. In England, during Christmas, I remember there are toys. I forgot what it's called, but it's kind of shaped like a big candy, and there's 2 handles at the end, and 2 people pull, and a prize would come out. And and I think it would come out to one side or something like that. So people always wish that they would get the one side with the prize, and inside there's usually a paper crown, and you put on your head during your Christmas meal. I think living in England really helped me appreciate America, because a lot of times it's easier to contrast, to say, hey, for example, America and China is completely different. America and Brazil is completely different, and if you factor in the language and the culture. But whereas England, it's a lot closer. I mean, other than Canada, of course, although we speak the same language and we mostly have the same roots, or a lot of times have the same roots, the standard of living is completely different. To give a contrast, for example, a steak here in the States is like what? $5, $6, $7 a pound. But in England, if you kind of convert it back to US currency, a steak would be $12, $13, $14 a pound. So with that, life is a lot more expensive than England. Football or soccer is really big in the UK.